Welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman. I'm the Assistant Professor and Program Director of Theology and the Arts here at United, and I'm very excited to have my beloved colleague, the Reverend Dr. Cindy Beth Johnson, with me today, and some of her students from Directed Study this semester who are going to share their work with us. So I'll turn it over to you just to share a little bit about what they've been doing in this class.
Yeah, great. Well, this was a great privilege for me to do this directed study. The students were interested in thinking about how the arts can be integrated in worship. And that's probably one of my most passionate subject matters, because I think one of the biggest challenges for the church is that it is so often boring. And there's this great quote that I love that says, there's something incredibly spectacular about the fact that on Sunday morning we can make this incredibly spectacular event sound so boring and unspectacular. And I think it's the call of religious leaders and communities to find ways to bring arts, poetry, music, visual arts, dance, movement, all of those things into the space to help make worship more meaningful, more relevant, to make it come alive. So when people leave, they'll go, oh, you can't believe what they did when they talked about whatever the text was. So these three very skilled, talented artists, theologian students have been with me this term, and I'm just excited to see what they have done. They focused on Lent and Easter. And so we will all see them together.
Wonderful. Hey, so Amber, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off here. You should have screen sharing abilities if you want.
Okay. Okay, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Can y'all see it widened?
Yes.
Okay. So in approaching this semester, Dustin and I got together last semester and talked about, and we dreamed up this study, and we're so grateful. I'm so grateful that Cindy Beth has led us in this semester. It's been really great to learn from her and to understand all the breadth of knowledge that she has and that she brought to our class weekly. It's been super scary. It has been nerve-wracking and, remarkable all up in one. And so this semester for me was all about first times. And so today I bring to you the sacred arts of first times. And for me to be a DMin student in theology and the arts, I have a extensive background in ministry, but I don't have an extensive background in integrating the arts and ministry. And so this semester really allowed me to do that. And so, so first I want to introduce myself. My name is Amber. I am a DMin student, like I've already said, and I am currently serving as an unpaid artist in residence at the First Presbyterian Church and Church of the Covenant in Jacksonville, Alabama, where I live. And these churches are steeped in a tradition of liturgy that is to the core Presbyterian, and has been really, really interesting to talk to the pastor about how to approach this semester, approach the season of Lent in a new way, knowing that these congregations have never done this before. And so not only was it first times for me, but it was also first times for the congregations themselves. And so I had to approach this in a way that allowed me to practice and implement new things while also being mindful of the congregation themselves and how this is new to them. And sometimes we know that in church, things can be really scary when they're new. And so I did not want to, do something extravagant and super over the top for the first times. But I learned very quickly that I wanted to do that, but I couldn't do that. And so my goal this semester and for the season of Lent, which was what I centered my arts and worship project on, was to just introduce the arts and worship and also my leadership as an artist in residence, and just help the congregation feel comfortable with incorporating it. And I did that in a number of ways. And so the first way I did that was through art workshops. And no, it's not Sunday morning, it's Saturday lunch kind of thing. And no, it's not during worship. But what this did was it helped mainly the women of the church come to the church and try something new for the first time, where eventually what happened was they got to flex their own creative muscles, and they got to get real comfortable with me and comfortable with themselves and their abilities. And it eventually evolved into something else. And so this first workshop I did was we made planter pots, because this church, their whole season of Lent was focused on flowers, focused on growth, focused on the life of the resurrection and the life of Jesus, and then how that is juxtaposed against death. And so we painted, I'm primarily an alcohol ink artist. That's the medium I use. And so we painted planter pots using alcohol ink, and they really enjoyed it. I think they really, we got to plant things and talk about what we wanted to plant during this season. And then the second workshop we did was with watercolor, and we painted watercolor flowers, again, just to go along with the theme. And the main thing was just to get them comfortable. And by the second workshop, they were saying, all right, when are we doing this again? And then that began the conversation rolling, and we are now set up, and we're setting ourselves up to do things on Sunday or Saturdays for worship, creating art on Saturdays for worship on Sunday to display, to use, and these two, albeit small things, created something very new for them. And again, this has just been a platform that's going to allow all of us together to move into using the arts in worship more regularly. A second thing, or another first that I did, I preach once a month at the other church at First Presbyterian, and I love preaching, and I have this book that's The Preacher as Liturgical Artist. If you don't have that, if you love preaching and you're an artist, I highly recommend this book. But ultimately, what David Johnson does is that he explains that using metaphor is a great way to exercise the imagination. And so what I did was, this was Palm Sunday, and we used the Luke text where at the very end of the story, Jesus says, if these were to stop, the stones would then cry out. And so my 3-year-old son passed out to every person a stone. And at the end of my sermon, I led them through a meditative practice where we imagined ourselves in that crowd of people shouting, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And how if someone were to tell us to stop, or if we were unable to shout praise for all that God has done, then what would the stones say in our place? And so they got to take that stone home with them as a metaphor for all the work and all the power that God has done in their lives. And it was very powerful. It's something that I had never done before. I've been preaching for about 3 or 4 years now, and I'd never done that before. And also, they had never been invited to do something like that. And so it was very memorable for the both of us. The last thing, and I think the most culminating thing, was on Easter Sunday at Church of the Covenant, which is the church that that I had been doing the art workshops. We wanted to do something through worship, and do something as art. And the pastor was very, she was a little apprehensive, like, we don't need to do, like, I'm a little, people might not respond. And so we had to really be creative in the way that we approach this. And I had to be very mindful because I wanted to do something like really big, over the top. But her sermon was all about, despite the shadows of Saturday and despite the shadows of death, there's always Easter morning light, and the light of that first, the resurrection. And so she had said, this is what my sermon's about. And I got an idea to make a paper lantern out of tissue paper, which is so funny because at the beginning of the semester, Cindy Beth had brought up about tissue paper, and I said, I think tissue paper is just so dumb, or that's just not that, that's just, I wanted to be upscale. I was like very, very judgmental towards tissue paper. And it's very funny, the irony is that like my entire like the culminating project was all in tissue paper, which was super funny. And so here I am putting this together. You do a simple paper mache. And what I did was I created like a globe that I then sat on top of a light fixture that I had already had. And so here are the stages. It was super fun. I'd never done paper mache before with tissue paper. And again, it was super interesting. And I didn't really know where I was going with this. I had this idea in my head, and much like art, when you have this idea and then you get into the flow of things, you just move with your intuition. You don't really question it. And I did question several times, like, is this going to be good enough? Is this going to be powerful? It's just a tissue paper dome. Is it going to impact the way that I had intended, or that we wanted to incorporate? Was it going to be meaningful enough? And so as I got it together, and then this is actually in the sanctuary, and it has some leaves on it. And so what I did was I cut out paper flowers out of tissue paper, and we put them in the bulletins, and every person that came in Sunday morning had a tissue paper flower. And so after the sermon, I went up and we had a moment of reflection, and I asked them, what area or what moment in your life, because she talked in the sermon also about memory, could you use a little more Easter light? And so on the flower, on this representation of life and growth, so they had a moment during communion. We learned in this class that if you want some people to do something new, you pair it with something they already know. And so we were already having communion. And so the pastor and I, Lynn, she said, well, why don't we just get them to do the thing while they're up and moving for communion, because that's normal for them. And so we did, and it worked out so great. And so what they did was, I just had some glue sticks, and I put some glue on the back of the paper, and then they pressed what they had wrote, the flower onto the globe or the dome of the lantern, and we lit it up. This is lit up. And so then, because they were collective in this little art, this small art piece, this all small symbolic gesture about these things that need a little more Easter light, how the resurrection and Jesus Easter is a time that we can do that. And so Again, it was very, very transformative for me personally. I was getting like choked up at times because I didn't actually believe that this would work. I didn't actually think that it would all come together. And at the end, it did not come together the way that I originally envisioned. And that, that's okay, because it came out better. And this is the pastor and her two daughters with the globe itself. And it was really nice to see everyone. They were more than willing to participate. And I think that moving forward with this church, like they are definitely going to be, I think, a little more open and a little more willing to try these things on as we move forward. And I think what I really loved was after she had prayed, after communion, and then she had prayed the last thing, and we did not plan, of course you don't plan these kinds of things, but she had said something about the hope for the Easter light. Amen. And as everybody opened up their eyes, I flipped the switch on because it doesn't look like a light. And then the light came on, and it was a really great experience for me because this was the first time I had done something like this. This is the first time I had ever done something like this. And again, it was really great to see the fruits of my labor, and me as an artist put these together, and it to be so well received, and then it have the impact and really carry the message of what does it mean to have the Easter light, the resurrection, for us. So we had to read a number of books, but this one was my absolute favorite. If you don't have this book, Spaces for Spirit by Nancy Chin, like you should definitely go and find it. And I'm just going to read a little bit about why art is so important, why artists are so important to the church. We never end up making what we intend to create. Always along the way, the art asserts itself. The materials create new tensions, new ways of seeing, new possibilities. The act of working it out uncovers what the artist could not fully have predicted. It is a kind of search and research for the artist, a quest, a clarification of discoveries. And in the end, the result of that adventure is what we share in sensate material forms. Art making is like that. We leave behind the marks of that conversation with the materials that is evidence of the same spirit, that Holy One, stirring in the unconfined space of our imagination. We offer to the church, like a golden gift, the joys and struggles that wrestle within us toward a form, a melody, a gesture, a metaphor. We understand that art is the way that we can hint of this glory, this mystery of the source of that very life itself.
I didn't see how long.
It might have been like 20 minutes. It might have been a little too long.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was checking how long Ariel's video is. So Ariel's video is like less than 10 minutes. So we certainly have time for Q&A or any kind of conversation response to yours, and then we can do Dustin's and then include Ariel's. Yeah, so are there any comments or questions for Amber?
Amber, I love that. Hey, Amber, it's Molly.
Hi.
Hi there. I love that you say that an artistic piece never really kind of turns out as you think it's going to. It takes on its own life. I remember Terry Roselle, who's a potter, one time say, when the clay is resistant, he ultimately just asks, what do you want to be? While it's on the wheel. What's your process when it does not turn out as you thought it was going to?
You have to let go of what you think it should be, and you have to appreciate it for what it is. So I think it's more of an internal understanding rather than a molding and melding of what the actual thing is of itself. And so for me, for this project, it was very much just Amber, you got to let go of what's in your mind, and you've got to appreciate it for how it exists in physical form right in front of you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
If I were to wish for our alums to learn one thing before they go out into whatever work they do in a parish, it would be that sometimes things aren't going to turn out the way that, and that the arts are precisely our teacher in that, because you can work with councils, church councils, you can work with confirmation classes, you can work in a leadership setting, but you have to realize that the other part of your situation is going to also have ideas, and the arts teach us that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. My name's Pan. I don't think we've met, but hello.
Hi.
I'm curious how, if anyone commented on the shift of like a communal activity from like personal worship. I know that music is one of those things that we kind of share, but often people go to church for community, not and art for themselves. So I'm wondering if you're like had any reflections or comments from participants in that collective art making.
You know, I think like, because Sunday, you know, it was just a week ago, not even a week ago, a couple days ago. I have not had the opportunity to hear from people. I mean, obviously the pastor, she just thought it was so amazing that I could take what she was preaching about and do something that was complimentary and just kind of drove home the point of what she was trying to preach. And so I think, you know, it was very much like, oh my gosh, I love doing this. It was so fun. But I'm sure, you know, there are, you know, not critiques and feedback. And I just haven't heard them yet. So we'll see on Sunday what people really say.
Thank you. Well, for the sake of time, we'll move on to Dustin, then we can always, you know, if you have more questions for Amber, either put them in the chat or we can maybe circle back at the end. Thanks again, Amber, for sharing.
Thank y'all.
I didn't even think about introducing myself, Amber, and then you did it. So thank goodness I volunteered to go second. I'm Dustin Wilson. I live in Seattle, and I have been worship leader at Woodland Park Presbyterian Church for a couple of years now. And I, unlike Amber, am very lucky to already be in a community that's very open to using the arts, and kind of would be willing to try anything once, even if it was really weird. So my goal was a little bit to move kind of past that being willingness and more into the realm of how do we grow this willingness. So 1 second. So here at United, we are fond of saying that art is theology. In my project, my goal was to extend that same artist theology way of thinking into weekly worship, to weave art into the worship experience in a way that was so inherently a part of the fabric of the worship itself, it was impossible to extricate it from the rest. In essence, to say art is liturgy and liturgy is art. So, as should always be true with any worship theme, the concept was conceived in Scripture, specifically the assigned Scripture readings for Lent and Holy Week as they appear in the narrative lectionary. With the narrative lectionary, we look at our foundational faith stories in their narrative arc over the course of the church year, beginning with one of the creation accounts, and then from there reading through Genesis, the stories of Moses, the prophets, and so on, and then into one of the four Gospels, finishing in Acts. as if all of these stories might intentionally speak to each other in a linear fashion. Because the narrative lectionary is
That's
on
right.
a 4-year cycle, we read the book of John in a self-contained way rather than sprinkled about all the years, as is the case in 3-year cycles. All of this background is to tell you that we were reading John this year. The interesting thing about John is that he spends a remarkable amount of time talking about the Passion. So much so that the assigned scripture readings for Lent start with the raising of Lazarus and then sit in the Passion narrative for the rest of Lent until Easter. I wanted my congregation to feel that darkness, the darkness of those last few days of Jesus' life, the introspective dark of Lent represented by the emotional darkness of the Passion. The abandonment, isolation, and desolation, all of that happened after the celebration on Palm Sunday. I wanted to invite my congregation to view the darkness of the last few years of their life through the lens of the Passion story. To sit in that dark and messy place with God, with Jesus, and with each other. To acknowledge the mess, the discomfort, the sorrow and the sadness, the regret and the shame, but not to try to cover it up or sweep it away, but to sit in it, letting it change us as we change it, each informing the other's view. The series was called Jesus Walked This Lonesome Valley, a Lenten journey through spirituals and the blues. We used the book Dear White Peacemakers outside of worship to discuss the ways we can connect our faith practices and our social justice practices. Author Osheta Moore uses spirituals and the blues in her book to frame the messages that she gives us. By tying into the same spirituals and the blues framework in worship, we were also able to then pull in the contexts of our own worldly mess. On the first day of Lent, the congregation walked into a sanctuary that looked as though it hadn't been cleaned since the previous Palm Sunday.
Wow.
Palms gathered around the communion table, strewn about the seats, stuffed into the back of the seats behind the hymnals, on the floor, yellow and purple streamers, strips of colored ticker tape on the floor and seats, and a large banner declaring Hosanna. As they came to their seats, they were confronted with this mess. They had choices to make. Do they sit on it, pick it up and hold it, throw it on the floor? There was no right choice, but you had to decide what to do with your mess. Our time sitting in this mess changed the mess as much as it changed us. As we continued to journey through Lent, the mess continued to shift and grow along with the coming darkness of Lent. As we began every service, instead of a prelude, the congregation was invited to learn the blues, how the specifics of this art form allow for the expression of our most sorrowful emotions in a way that both honors the truth of the past and creates something new and beautiful from it. Moving into worship, we continued to explore these themes through our music and hymns, confronting the reality that our hymnal is filled with stolen music, encountering the Passion narrative as direct participants rather than mere listeners.
Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law."
Just we can't really hear the sound if you're.
Yeah, I couldn't really hear it very well on my end either. After the sermon, we took a time of prayer and meditation. During this time, the congregation was invited to name their personal blues, their mess, their struggle. What concerns do they hold deep in their heart? They were invited to write these concerns on any of the blue or purple strips of paper found on the floor, in their seats, etc. And then to place them on the chicken wire sculpture that was sitting on the communion table. Through the course of Lent, we would work together to create something beautiful out of our sorrows. At the same time, I also invited them to remember the joys that strengthen them and to write those on the yellow or orange strips and to take it with them as a reminder of our overlooked moments of joy. As Lent became Palm Sunday, the congregation was asked to stay out of the sanctuary. We revisited how we got to the place we are now, the celebration and the joy. We waved palm branches, threw ticker tape confetti, and processed into the sanctuary, where we found ourselves at Golgotha. At the center of the service, I set up the cross and an altar filled with candles. The Hosanna banner that once hung proudly, only to eventually be dragged across the floor, now hanging on the cross, while I preached from the foot of the cross. In our meditation moment, this time after the prayers had been added to the sculpture, all of the candles were extinguished on the altar, and we broke our silence with the blues, offering our sorrow in the form of a physical blue note to the cross. And then on Easter, the mess was gone, replaced by a cross of joy, while still holding space for all of those blue notes that we always have in our life. Hosanna was raised, and we sang.
Just that simple. Let's do it all together.
Dustin?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments and questions for Dustin? About this project. Some Lenten dream.
I'm always curious about the reactions of the participants, so was it, obviously they've been exposed to art, you said, and so it's not like the experience of it was new, but the longevity of the project maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I'm just wondering if you could gauge the reaction through the whole 6-week period.
Yeah, so funny enough, the first week, anybody who knew kind of what the plan of the theme was came up to me and they said, I thought it would be messier.
That's so good.
So you could have gone further.
Well, I said, well, the plan was for it to get worse as Lent continues. And they, oh, that makes sense. But yeah, every week there was a comment on how something hit somebody. You know, there was always, we were making the congregation read aloud the scripture when it was the crowd who was talking. And we were engaging members of the congregation in like this reader's theater format of scripture telling instead of just listening. And on Palm, I got to preach 3 times in the midst of this series, and I was struck by how I found the art itself not only kind of informing my own sermons, but also strengthening my own theology. And I that was not something that I set out to do, and I was shocked that it was happening.
Awesome.
Can you say more about what you mean by that, Dustin?
Yeah, I think that over the course of the last, I don't know, probably 15 months, I have really come to accept my labeling myself as a process theologian. And as I was working in this medium that was constantly changing and evolving and responding to the way the congregation was responding to it, the more I saw God in that. And the more confident I felt in the fact that I was seeing God in that.
Did you see Elena's question in the chat?
I didn't. Was everyone in person? No. We were fully hybrid. So everyone who is a known participant in the church before Lent was mailed that ticker tape confetti to have in their home so that they could interact with that as well. They could mail those in so that we would put it on the sculpture for them, or they could write in the chat so that we could write it and put it on the sculpture for them.
I'm curious, Dustin, if that hymn at the end was one that you wrote with the blues context in mind, or if that was something that you found.
No, it's a completely original, written with the blues context in mind, and it was the story of the Passion all the way through.
And then Max also put a comment in the chat there about appreciation for it being a season-long liturgical art form, and that obviously the church seemed to respond well to that. And Max asked, "What's next?" Seems like you could do an Advent project, a season-long Advent project.
Pentecost.
Yeah. Is there interest? Yeah, I mean, have you thought about? I know you're just like, you've just made it through Holy Week, so
right. We do so. This is definitely leveling up. We typically have some sort of art project that we do in Lent. It's never been something that we've actively worshiped with every week, as opposed to kind of like pulling our inspiration from the art project that we're working on outside of worship. So no, we haven't really talked about what's next, but it was very successful. So even though I'm actually leaving in September, I'm sure they will be doing stuff like this again.
The president distracted me.
I love that you had the connection. I mean, I love that your naming of it being connected, not just art during Lent, but art as Lent. But then also that you were reading this book, and so you really connected it. So it was educational, it was spiritual, it was worship, it was all. I mean, I think that was really well done.
The hope is to impart to everybody that every moment of your life is worship if you want it to be, right? You have to bring your whole self every time.
Thank you, Dustin. What a great project. Yeah. A round of applause for Dustin. For the sake of time here, we want to move on to Ariel's recording, and Ariel had important strategic planning meeting at her church. So she took the time to record a little video, which is really wonderful. So it's just a little shorter than 10 minutes, I think. So here's.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariel Johnson. I am a Master's of the Arts in Theology and the Arts student at United. I have one more year left, supposedly, and I am taking the Arts and Worship directed study with Dustin and Amber with Dr. Cindy Beth Johnson as our professor. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person today. I completely forgot I have work things, because I have work things, apparently. So I thought I would just quick share a short little video here for you about my the project that I did. So what I ended up doing was I designed a Good Friday service using shadow play. So my pastor here in Lake Harriet United Methodist Church in Minneapolis, if you're local, come check us out sometime. Come say hi to me on Sunday mornings. So Pastor Karen approached me and said, hey, I'm really interested in doing a scriptural Stations of the Cross, but through shadow play for Good Friday. Are you interested in helping me with this? And I was like, so let me tell you about this time that I did shadow puppetry in college and actually worked on designing the whole entire process with the technical director. So I was like, yeah, of course I'm gonna do this. Sounds awesome, right up my alley for sure. So what we did was she sent me the 14 Stations of the Cross, and then I made shadow sheets for screens, and we took lights and we backlit them, and then I had people go in silhouette. And there was a little bit of movement, but not a lot, mostly because all these people were coming at 6 p.m., an hour before the service. And so I handed them a sheet, and I said, here are your stations. We did a walkthrough of where everyone goes. I took tape and taped down the floor so they could know where their places are. And then we just did it, and it was awesome. And honestly, it went a lot better than I thought. Of course, as a theater person and as a stage manager by trade, I'm thinking the whole time, what can I do? Oh, what do I do? I could have done this better, or this could have happened. But one of the things that helps make this a worship service instead of a theatrical performance is that it's live. Anything can happen. I requested 6 volunteers and ended up with 10, right? I'm on the fly deciding, oh, okay, now I have this person, and making and matching, and I didn't know the ages of the people who were going to be there. I didn't know the backgrounds of the people who were going to be there. So it was a really cool experience to be like, oh, okay, I know you can't do this, but you can, and you can't do this, but you can, and mixing and matching and just trying something new and exciting and vibrant. And it was really well received. We had 75 or so in attendance, including all of the choir and all the puppeteers. Saying puppeteers, but the only puppetry we really did was I took a stick and put a tree on a stick, and a kid held it out and there was a tree. Other than that, it was physical bodies, physical manifestations, and silhouette, which was so cool. So the 2 pastors, because we did this jointly with Living Spirit United Methodist Church, which is 8 minutes down the street or whatever. So this is a joint project. And then, so the 2 pastors, they alternated reading scripture, and then I put in images and sound and the shadow silhouettes to make the story come to life in a new way. And the thing that I'm most excited about that I did, that I'm going to show you here in this short video, so I'm not taking up all of your time, and because Amber and Dustin have done some really amazing things too, and since they're there, I want you to talk to hear everything from them. One of the things that I did was I really wanted to make the end of the story meaningful. One of the things that Pastor Karen and Pastor Sean expressed to me is they did not want to shy away from the blood and the guts and the sin kind of a thing. Personally, in my Christology, that is a hard thing for me because I don't necessarily subscribe to that theology. But it's the theology that these 2 churches are you know what? We think of sin and we talk about it a little bit differently than most people would think of it. But it is something that we need to acknowledge. And we need to acknowledge that Jesus died. Jesus is a real person who really died. And people don't know how to think about that. Because they're yeah, Jesus is risen and blah, 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 and Easter's happy. But Good Friday means something. So I decided I wanted this to be the most visceral reaction I could get without spraying blood on people in the congregation. I'm pretty sure most of the people who came, which are your traditional older members who come to everything and they're very traditional and it's awesome. I was can't really spray them with fake blood. Would I love to do that? Would the Halloween scare actor in me love to do that? Yes. Can I do that? No. So, instead, what I did was there was a child who I knew was going to be able to help, and then we actually had a second child who showed up with their guardian on the night out. So I was like, oh, you're the perfect size. So our youth pastor, who is helping with the service, carried him out. So we wrapped up the child in a burial cloth, and their guardian and Pastor Chris walked them out. Actually, maybe just Pastor Chris like carried him like this. I can't remember. I guess I do. Okay, it was like this. Because originally it was going to be the two of them carrying him, and then we just decided to do the one, and it worked out really well. So our youth pastor carried the body of a child out past the congregation, and then the cross followed. So the person who was portraying Jesus for all except for one silhouette, he carried out the cross behind the body. And it was really cool. And like, I don't know what the audience's reactions were because I was behind the whole time, but like, I got chills watching the body go by, because that's not, like, you see the cross and you see people carrying the cross and that's whatever, but to see an actual body wrapped up in a cloth, like you hear, we put him in the tomb and carried him to the tomb, and you see him being carried away and out past you. And like, this is a child. This is like a tiny baby. Like, I don't know. He must have been like, probably like anywhere between 8 to 10. So it was really, 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 really cool. So I'm going to shut up because I am going to let y'all listen to Amber, Dustin talk. Thank you for hearing my mini story. And then I'm going to show just the last little snippet of the service for you to see. And then I hope you all have a great day. And if you have any more questions, you feel free to email me or whatever. Otherwise, I will see you later. So enjoy this last little bit of the service.
Luke 23:44 through 46. By now it was high noon. The whole earth was dark. The darkness lasted for 3 hours, a total blackout. The temple curtain split right down the middle. Jesus cried out, "Father, I place my life in your hands." Then he breathed his last breath. Matthew 27:57 through 61. Late in the afternoon, a wealthy man from Anthemia, a disciple of Jesus, arrived. His name was Joseph. He went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate granted his request.
Joseph took the body and wrapped it in clean linens, put it in his own tomb, a new tomb only recently cut into the rock, and rolled a large stone across the entrance. Then he went off, but Mary Magdalene and the other Mary stayed, sitting in plain view of the tomb.
Yeah. That's pretty good. So great that she was able to put that together this morning. Well, yeah, you can offer.
I want to tell her great job.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job.
We can email her with questions and comments, but
Heart monitor thing was actually the more unexpected thing,
yeah,
because she had already
right.
said that the body was
Right.
being carried, so.
yeah.
One of the things we talked about is how to, like, you know, like maybe there's someone whose parent just died, or how to have like maybe trigger warnings, or just to, you know, like if you've just gone through that with a relative. I have a friend who's having open heart surgery today, and so, you know, you hear it differently. And I think that's true of the arts in general. We have to give people space, because it can invite things to come up into us in a really different level. And so anytime we do things with the arts, I think we want to have space for people to process.
You're gonna have an arts chaplain.
Yeah, an arts chaplain, there you go. Sign me up.
Yeah. Lisa put in the chat, love the way each project adapted to the particular congregations. Absolutely. Like it feels like they're very responsive, I think, to like kind of where the congregations are kind of at in terms of their relationship to the arts and specific.
And with Ariel's, it was 2 churches that
Yeah, that's
decided to
interesting too.
collaborate, which I think, that layers of, not liturgical layer, but.
Yeah,
level it up.
a logistic layer, certainly.
More complicated.
Yeah.
And I think like if we take away one thing, if we remember one thing from this class or from these presentations, it's that you cannot pull and force your congregation to be somewhere they're not. And that you have to come alongside them and level up, per se, in the words of Dustin, like you level up what we're doing. But I can't force my congregation to do something that they're not entirely comfortable with. So it's very much like gentle nudges. And it's so, yeah, I loved it. I was really afraid that that something was going to be similar, and they weren't. They were all 3 different and very, very different contexts. And I loved like getting ideas from them. And what was really great and that we didn't talk about was that throughout this whole semester, we met weekly, which is not typical for directed study. But we met weekly so that we could collaborate and talk with one another and get ideas and brainstorm. And the things that I did would not have come to fruition without Ariel and Dustin and Cindy Beth. Like it would not have happened. And so it's important to acknowledge that we can't do things in a vacuum as artists. We have to, we can do them in vacuums. It just won't be very good. It just won't be very good or be all that it needs to be. And so the collaborative process behind the scenes, apart from our congregations, I think was one of the most beneficial things. And I'm a little sad that now we're going to have to go into other seasons without each other.
I agree. I think that one of the best things about that class was the formation of like a artistic liturgy cohort that could bounce ideas off of each other and help you figure out how to do some weird idea that you have. And I didn't say this, but I also was not hugely open to using tissue paper on my project.
That's ulterior convert you all to tissue paper.
So here's what I want to say about tissue paper. I love tissue paper because it's beautiful. I love colors. But what I love the most about tissue paper is that it invites you, I think, into liminal space. Because you can see through it, you can see the layers. And so the whole notion of liminal space where the spirit, God, whatever is close, but we can't see it. There's something about the way tissue paper for me evokes that.
I was worried that it was going to be too fragile. And that was not true. It's not fragile. You can tie it into a knot and it won't rip. I recommend it.
Something theological about tissue paper. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, of course, to Cindy Beth for leading this awesome cohort, and thank you to Dustin and Amber and Ariel for sharing your work with us. So exciting, and to everyone for your questions and conversation.
Yeah, great work.
Yeah. And this is our last arts lunch of the semester, so we'll see you in the fall. Yeah.